everybody. Welcome to our second webinar. The finish line is in sight. So we're almost there to the end, everyone. So glad you could make it. And we're going to jump right in and get started because we want to leave a lot of time for you to share with some of the colleagues that are here today. So this is our agenda. Welcome again, and we're going to go over the objectives. We're going to have a brief review of the two standards that are for adult education. We're going to talk a little bit about lesson planning and formulating questions using two different frameworks, Bloom's taxonomy or you can use one or the other or both, Webb's depth of knowledge, and text-dependent questions. We're going to have a group activity where you'll be joining a breakout room by your teaching area and doing some brainstorming on tasks, strategies, and so forth based on the article, the text that was provided in Moodle that you were kind of prompted to look over at least a little bit. So hopefully you had a chance to do that, but we'll provide it again. And think about if you were using that text with your class, what kind of alphabetics and or fluency and or vocabulary or comprehension kind of questions and activities would you use with that text? And then we'll finish up by looking ahead at your final assignments. So by the end of our hour together today, you'll be able to use research-based frameworks for reading lesson plans and for formulating questions that help students meet the reading standards, CCRS and ELPS, by eliciting the higher order thinking and employing and extracting evidence from text. In that activity I talked about, you'll be identifying strategies, activities, and tasks to teach one or more of those four components of reading to students at your level. So, as you recall from our first webinar, when we discussed the College and Career Readiness Standards, CCRS, and the English Language Proficiency Standards, the CCRS were first, and they called for more rigor in adult education to better prepare our students for college and career pathways. And then following the CCRS, the English Language Proficiency Standards were written and released to correspond with the CCRS, but modified a bit to pinpoint more specifically the language needs of our English language learners. So one thing that we discussed just a little bit in the webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago were the three shifts that were first part of CCRS and then are mirrored in the ELPS. And so I'd like to give you a moment to respond in the chat if you can recall any of those three shifts as they apply, especially to reading. Does anybody recall any of the shifts? I'll give you a little hint if you need. Something about evidence. Something about knowledge. Yes, great. Yeah, thank you. Yes, extracting evidence from text, exactly. And so that is one. I'll pause for just another second. Anybody building background knowledge, exactly. So the first one, let me see if anybody else got in there. Okay, the first shift is to have our students engage with complex text, not simplified to the point that they're just at their level and so simple for them, but complex text that will help build background knowledge and complex text like they might actually encounter in real life. And you're right, exactly. The second shift was having students extract and employ evidence from text to ask a variety of different questions. And the texts that we use are complex, but also are helping build knowledge in different subject areas that will help our students once they transition into career pathways or higher education. So those are the three shifts. You got it. Great job. So what we'll be doing today is examining briefly how we can formulate questions that will hit on these, that require our students to answer questions in a manner that is grounded in evidence from texts that they have read. And in other words, we're going to work on questions that require students to actually do that second shift, extract and employ evidence from text. Okay. So as you can see here in CCRS Anchor 1, at the lowest level, Band A, students should be able to ask and answer questions about key details. So that anchor standard, at its highest level, though, level E, becomes much more rigorous and demands more careful reading of a text. Obviously, a more complex and academic text. So as we look at level E, it says, cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what a text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. So as you're going to see when we look at Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's DOK, those first questions there, like in Band A, at the lowest level, they're just finding the answer and pulling. But as we get to level E, students are having to use more complex cognitive processes like the critical thinking, the analysis, and so forth that go much deeper and often require more than just one superficial reading of a text. Now, here are the English language proficiency standards. And right here, this is only one of the 10 standards. In Standard 1, we see that for our English language learners, they need to, at the lowest level, level 1, be able to construct meaning from oral presentations and literary and informational text through level appropriate listening, reading, and viewing. So as I mentioned in the first webinar, the English language proficiency standards don't necessarily separate out reading, but have many skills combined. But we can see still, whether it's reading or watching a video or listening to some sort of lecture or broadcast or recording, students are similarly identifying key words and phrases at the lowest level. Whereas when we get to our highest levels of ESL instruction, our students should be able to do these things as they exit our programs. And that is at the highest level, as you can see, level 5, students need to determine main ideas, analyze the development of ideas, and cite specific details from text to support their analyses. And something that we've mentioned, and I've seen many of you comment on in Moodle, you do have your students do this, and it is challenging, summarizing text. So we can see these standards help us different levels of instruction meet students where they are and then build their skills over time as they progress through our programs. But what I like especially, I think some of you have mentioned that you do teach either many different classes or a class that is multi-level, then we can see that how we can differentiate the instruction for our students. If some of them are on the lower end, this would be the expectation. And as they move up through the levels, how we would ask different questions to get deeper thinking with their texts. Okay, so with these two anchor standards here, for a given standard, there are different levels of demands on students appropriate to their current abilities. So for instance, beginning level readers may be asked to answer questions about key details. So that's CCRS Anchor 1 Level A. And identify few key words and phrases in written text. That's ELP Standard 1, Level 1. To much more cognitively demanding skills, as we see at the highest levels, which we just looked at, requiring students to explain, analyze, infer, summarize. However, while the standards require different levels of proficiency at different levels, that doesn't necessarily mean that if we're teaching a lower level class, that students should only be kept to that the requirements of that level. because every class is different. Every individual student may have different reading abilities. So as I mentioned, that's when we can differentiate. Our lesson planning and questioning should challenge all students at all levels. So we don't have to just at our beginning levels, whether that's ESL or adult secondary classes, if our students are the lower levels, only ask them to answer key detail questions, right? We can stretch them, but they should be able to do that before moving on to the next level, right? To demonstrate that ability. So in sum, we can see a progression of skills that encompasses both language proficiency and cognitive demands. So speaking of cognitive demands, what you see here are a couple of tools we can use. On the left is that famous pyramid. Maybe some of you have seen it before. Bloom's taxonomy. It was revised. I think it was it's from the 1950s, but it has been revised since then, I think back in the 2000s. And on the right is Webb's depth of knowledge. So those two frameworks can be very useful for us when we have a text. Now, if you use textbook, hopefully your textbook is high quality and is aligned with college and career readiness or ELPS, those standards, and has questions that meet these different levels of cognitive thinking. However, sometimes, I don't know if you're like me, I like to choose a text that it's maybe a news item that I've seen online, and I simplify it and I use it with my classes, and there are no questions. So it's on me to formulate the questions. So we can use these tools to help us formulate questions that get beyond the basic, simple one-word answer. Okay, so of course, we should start with foundational skills of asking questions, remembering what they've read, recalling, reproducing, but we need to work up to those higher levels, like evaluating and creating. So we're going to start off today by discussing general question types. The types of questions we should ask students coincide with these different levels of thinking in these two models. The two models, as I said, can help us understand which questions will elicit what levels of thinking and guide us toward asking questions that place an appropriate, rigorous cognitive demand on our learners. So first, with Bloom's taxonomy, if you can just type yes or no, how many of you are familiar with it? Go ahead and type yes or no in the chat. Okay, yeah, I think most of us have been around for a while. Back from the 1950s, Benjamin Bloom came up with this model along with a team of cognitive psychologists to kind of categorize 3 domains of learning: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Then, as I said, in the 2000s, another team led by David Krathwohl revised a bit, not significantly, but just the top levels. The goal, this whole kind of framework, so that they more aligned with 21st century goals. So the create was added and evaluate was sort of flipped a little bit. So in sum, this taxonomy here can help us tap into students' metacognitive knowledge. And what we mean by that is helping students to think about how they think and learn. And there are many different metacognitive strategies involved in the reading process. So we have talked about the think aloud, modeling our own thinking process aloud as we are reading with students. So that's one example. We can also, with the think aloud, demonstrate self-monitoring as we're reading aloud with questioning, whether that's saying it out loud or writing questions in the margins, annotating, highlighting, and other thinking strategies that fluent readers like you and I, that we do when we are interacting with a text. In both the planning of reading lesson plans and in the development of questions on text that we have students read, using this taxonomy can be useful for structuring tasks as well. So using questions, structuring tasks, that go beyond that lowest level, remember and understand, but up to the higher levels. Now, Webb's DOK, can you type yes or no in the chat if you are familiar with Webb's depth of knowledge? Okay, few of you, yes. It kind of came more from career and technical, but now it's, used in many adult programs as well, somewhat. Okay, thank you. So you see, it's got only 4 levels, but there's a lot of correspondence with Bloom's taxonomy. It's just another framework. It's not so terribly different, and it was developed in the 1990s by Norman Webb. So it's just another way to assess the level of cognitive demand of different questions, activities, or tasks that we have learners do as they're working with a text. The DOK model has 4 levels instead of 6 or however many Bloom's has, and they go beyond that surface level. But we do see at level 1, similarly to Bloom's taxonomy, recall and reproduction. So some examples of this in reading instruction would be having students support their ideas by referring to the text verbatim with the word, tell us the one word to answer this question, or with slightly paraphrased responses, or using a dictionary to find the meanings of words if we're teaching vocabulary with a text, and recognizing figurative language in a reading passage, so metaphors, for example. Level 2, you see, is a little bit elevated. Skills and concepts. So in reading instruction, that would be having students use context clues to identify new vocabulary, unfamiliar words, phrases, and expressions. Predicting a logical outcome based on information in a text. Identifying and summarizing the major events in a narrative, for example. Then we have level 3, short-term strategic thinking. And this type of thinking happens when students explain or recognize how the author's purpose affects the interpretation of a reading selection. We could also have, with level 3, students doing the summarizing that we saw in the standards. Summarizing even not maybe from one source, but multiple sources, so also synthesizing. What else? Analyzing and describing the characteristics of various types of literature. The highest level is level 4, extended thinking. And at this highest level, students analyze and synthesize information from multiple sources, examine and explain alternative perspectives across a variety of sources, and describe and illustrate how common themes are found across texts from different cultures, for example. So you see quite similar, just, different, kind of a different approach, but you should use what works best for you, of course. So here are the 2. So we can see side by side, not extremely different, just worded in a bit, slightly different way. But just as a quick example, highlighting facts, explaining concepts, and connecting learners' experiences to a text correlate with Bloom's levels 1 through 3. And if we look on the right side, those types of activities would correspond with level 1 of Webb's DOK. Sorry. Typically, questions at that level have just one right answer. Okay, just one right answer. So when we have multiple choice questions, right? Questions like that are still important. Let's not say that they're not, but they establish learners' knowledge at those levels because that's important. First of all, if they didn't understand some of the basics of the article, we need to go back. But then if they did understand those basic questions at the lowest level of the cognitive domains, then that's great. We know that we can extend the learning upward, right? So those kinds of questions are really important for scaffolding learners' understanding and their ability to apply what they have read and understand to new information. Okay, so just a little bit more about this. To provide rigorous instruction in which we help students build their background knowledge and critical thinking skills as they engage with complex texts. However, we need to get beyond remember, understand, recall, and reproduce. We need to get them higher up in the cognitive domains. So, deeper engagement with a text, for example, can come in many different ways by rating and ranking and writing assignments based on texts that require higher level thinking and often involve learners' analysis and evaluation of new information. With that kind of activity, we are getting closer to Bloom's taxonomy level 4 and 5, and their students are engaging in multi-step thinking, Webb's depth of knowledge level 2, for example. When students do close reading, reading once to get some main ideas, reading again to go deeper and think and infer and do more critical thought with a text, and evaluate the ideas. That requires learners to then go back to the text and defend their responses to questions with multiple valid answers, not just one right answer. Then we're getting higher up to, for example, Webb's depth of knowledge level 3. And then at the create, I love the create, right? Working on meaningful projects where students have read maybe more than one text on a topic with different authors' perspectives, and doing an actual project with the background knowledge that they have enhanced and new knowledge that they've gained through reading. That would include extended thinking, as well as the synthesis of the ideas that they've read with different texts. So that is when we get to DOK level 4 and that highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, create. So I don't know if anyone here does project-based learning. I'm sure you do some sort of, hopefully, having students respond to texts by connecting reading and writing. But that's some, those are some kind of examples of how we get students beyond just remember and recall. So many of you may be aware of these different verbs that are used with Bloom's taxonomy. So I know, like, if you ever have created a new course or student learning outcomes, for example, these are really concrete ways for us to see that learners have achieved different levels of the cognitive domains. So you see, for example, define, identify, describe, then explain, describe, compare, and it goes, higher up the scale, different types of activities. These verbs can be very useful. So these verbs can be used in the questions that we ask students about text, as well as the tasks that we have them do with texts. As far as questioning strategies go, I want to mention that I know this is really hard for you to probably just see on the screen. So these are resources that are listed in Moodle, but these are question stems. So I have them printed out next to my workstation, as well as at the, next to the computer in my class, because sometimes there comes a time when I need to formulate some questions and I don't always think on my feet very well. And so it's really good to have these questions, they're stems, starter questions to use to get to different levels of thinking with your students when you're having them read a text. So on the left, show me, how do you know, point to, underline, why do you say that, put your pencil on. Those sort of prompts or question stems are perfect for our lowest level readers, like our beginning ESL learners. So they're going back to the text and just showing you where they found the answer, for example. The question stems in the middle, for example, at create, change, combine, compose, construct. So what would you predict or what would you infer? Okay, so those sort of questions are good for beginning to intermediate level readers. And then the list on the far right has questions stems that are for each level of Bloom's taxonomy for more advanced learners. So if you see level 6, create, propose an alternative to, how would you adapt? How would you design something to do something, construct a model, and so on? So that's really getting students to create with the knowledge that they've gained from reading texts. So these can be really useful, especially when you're having students do more than just read, but you're having them do something with those texts, or you have a text and you don't have any questions. Okay. This other set of question stems are from Webb's depth of knowledge, and these can give you an indication of the types of questions that could be used to elicit also different levels of thinking corresponding to Webb's depth of knowledge model. So, for example, at the lowest level, can you recall when did something happen? At the second level, level 2, can you explain how blank affected blank? How would you compare, contrast, classify? Level 3, strategic thinking. How is this related to that? What conclusions can you draw? How would you adapt to create something different? And at the highest level, what is your thesis based on the sources you have read? What conclusions can you draw? What is your hypothesis? What is the possible explanations for the results of your experiment? I mean, that's really getting to a very high academic level. But with scaffolded support, our students can do it. So, okay, we're going to move on just a little bit. So those are question stems. And you saw in the 3 shifts, evidence, employing and extracting evidence from text. So with that, we use what are called text-dependent questions. So I want to ask you, what comes to mind when you hear that? Text-dependent questions. What are text-dependent questions? So if you have any kind of idea of what that entails, it's not as hard as it seems. It's pretty easy, actually. So what are text-dependent questions? I'm pretty sure you're clackety-clack typing. Yeah. Yes, questions, yeah, found explicitly in the text, right? That relate back to the text. Sometimes I'm sure you've had it. Some learners want to like, oh, I read about this and it reminded me about the time when this happened to me. Well, that's wonderful. It's great that students can have a personal connection with a text, but in the workplace, in college courses, in careers, students need to be able to extract evidence. So we're going to define text-dependent questions, but you already did it in the chat. But we're going to look at different types suggested by 2 researchers from San Diego State University, Douglas Fisher and Nancy Fry. So just referring back to the standards before we move forward, look at this specific wording in the sets of standards, okay? So what you see, ELPS on the right, level 3, explain how the theme is developed by specific details in text. So there we see that extracting and employing. Then we see cite specific details and evidence from the text to support the analysis at levels 4 and 5. So there is where we're going to use text-dependent questions. Then for the CCRS, College and Career Readiness Standards, refer to examples in a text, quote accurately from a text. So they're getting to college level when they have to cite text, right? That's really getting them prepared for those types of courses. Cite several pieces of textual evidence to support analysis. And at the highest level, cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis. So as you can see, we are charged with helping students go back to the text and answer questions that require them to use information in the text. So what are text-dependent questions? As you said, questions that require students to use evidence from the text to present their careful analyses, their well-defended claims, and clear information. Sometimes it's verbatim, sometimes it's paraphrased, sometimes it's summarized, right? And questions that can be answered only by referring back to the text. So if the text has content that is so simple, then it's not really challenging our learners and they're not building background knowledge. So these questions need students to go back to that text. So again, personal feelings, wonderful, but we need to ask them these sort of questions to get them that rigorous reading instruction. And also questions that require close reading of text. So again, we've talked about what close reading is. So I think a lot of you said your process is a think aloud the first time, then students read it maybe silently again, answer some questions, then maybe building fluency, practice reading aloud. But close reading, it means you're not going to get all of your questions answered, there we go, in just one reading. They really have to go back and interact and dig deeper to find answers. Okay. So again, this is from an article written by Douglas Fisher and Nancy Frey, and they point out different topics for which text-dependent questions can be developed. There are questions that focus on parts of text and questions that focus on the whole. And of course, text-dependent questions must go beyond simple recall of information. The emphasis should be on using explicit and implicit information from the text to support reasoning. So we're going to look at these different types of text-dependent questions in turn. As we work our way through these, you're going to see how they go from just a part to whole, okay? So first is general understandings. As you can, imagine, that's main idea, gist questions. And so that starting with, what is this all about? Can you just give in a few words or a sentence what this was all about? Then we go to key details. So these questions focus on important details that the author uses to inform the reader and add clarity. They may be WH, when, where, why, how, etc. Questions in the STEM, and they tend to focus on information presented directly in the text, essential to understanding the text, not just trivial information. So then we go to vocabulary and text structure. Text structure questions require students to consider the organization of the text. Was it organized by problem solution, character dialogue? How is the action propelled in a narrative, for example? And vocabulary questions should indicate both denotative meaning, the dictionary definitions, as well as connotative meaning, like metaphors, figurative language, and feelings evoked from different word choices. These questions may also focus on shades of meaning, word choice, figurative language, and learning new words in context. Next, we have author's purpose. Why did this writer write this particular piece? Understanding the overall purpose of a text, including its genre, can help students follow the flow and make sense of what they're reading. So readers should know if the text was meant to inform, to entertain, to persuade, to explain something. So that's a really important type of question to ask students as well. Then we get to inferences, kind of the hard one. Inference questions require the close reading again and careful thought to consider how all the ideas or details in different parts of the text contribute to the whole. Reading between the lines is what I like to tell students. So it's much different than just finding a key detail. And then finally, we have opinions, arguments, and intertextual connections. Those types of questions come only after students have read a text several times. They've done that close reading to fully develop their understanding. And then from there, They can form opinions and arguments, and they may also identify connections and related evidence in other texts. So we see we're going from part two whole. And I just want to pause for a moment and ask you, why is general understandings at the bottom? You can go ahead and share in the chat. Why would you think general understandings is at the bottom? Any ideas? Yeah, exactly. So did you learn something? Did you understand what you read? Exactly. Yeah, great answers. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for sharing in the chat. Yes, exactly. Okay, yes. So the pyramid shows that in general, global questions about main ideas or general understandings and key detail questions occur more frequently when, in our textbooks and for us too, right? When we're formulating questions for students to answer about text, they occur more frequently than inference and opinion questions. But these are essential questions. Before we can ask students to answer more complex questions, we need to ensure that they have understood the gist and some of the supporting key details. But we cannot stop there. And it's worth noting that Fisher and Frey, who the originators of this model, point out that this ordering of questions does not need to be made as a rigid hierarchy necessarily. So we can ask students' opinion, okay, lower, sooner, but we should definitely try to ask many different types of questions so that we're not just stopping at general understanding and key details. Definitely. So you don't need to go necessarily in this order, but you do need to establish that they got the gist of the message, Lynn. You got it. All right. So we're going to pause for just a moment. Do you have any questions or comments about Bloom's taxonomy, Webb's DOK, or text-dependent questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. All right, so give you just a second. But now we're getting to the exciting part of today's webinar, the really fun part where we're getting down to really practical nitty-gritty, okay? We're going to be doing a collaboration activity for a final activity. So we want to give you some time to synthesize all you've been learning so far in the course and share in a collaboration activity. How many of you are familiar with Padlet? Have you ever heard of or used that digital tool? Okay, I love Padlet. It's wonderful. It's great because I use it in class for all kinds of things related to reading instruction and more. And we're going to be having you use Padlet. Okay. All right, you love it, Amy? Yeah, I love it. So what you're going to do right now, everyone, please click on the link in the chat, and I'll keep talking while you do that. What's going to happen is going to open in a new kind of window for you besides the Zoom screen, and you're going to locate the column for the learner level that you teach or that you want to focus on. Okay, so we've got beginning, intermediate, and advanced. I teach advanced. So what I'm going to do, hopefully you had a chance to read the text before you came to the webinar, but if not, the text is included there. Okay, and you can see the text. And what you're going to do is you're going to select the plus button to suggest an activity, a strategy, or a task that can address alphabetics that you would use along with that text, or comprehension, or fluency, or vocabulary, or any combination of those. Okay, so we're going to let you do this. We'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to do this on your own. And the really wonderful thing, everybody's ideas are all together. So you'll be able to see the Padlet after this, but I'm going to pause. I'll just be quiet for a minute and let you post. So you can add to the Padlet for the level that you teach or the level that you are most interested in. You tap on, you click the plus, then what you do after that is type in, and then don't forget to publish, and then that will be listed there. I believe that it is set up so that you can edit as well. So what we're going to do now is give you some time to discuss with other participants in today's webinar. And we're going to be opening breakup rooms that are labeled as beginning, intermediate, or advanced, so you can self-select which room to join. So you're going to say hello and take turns sharing your ideas, asking questions, and if something more comes up and you want to add more strategies, activities, or tasks to the Padlet list, please do that. And as I said, you can edit your earlier post if there's more you want to add or change. And we will be sharing this in Moodle for your future reference. Hopefully, probably you'll see something that is posted there, maybe in collaboration, that you might use for your final assignment for your lesson plan. So we're going to go ahead and open those rooms now. Are there any questions before we send you off? Okay, there we go. Okay, everybody's back. Well, thank you for participating in that activity, everybody. What we will be doing is we'll be posting the Padlet in Moodle, so maybe you want to refer back to it, and you can always add more. And if anybody was absent and is viewing this recording later on, please do visit the Padlet. This was kind of like, if you think of Bloom's taxonomy, that's kind of the brainstorm, and we're getting to the create, because this is what's coming up for your final assignment. So for the final assignments of the fourth week coming up, first we'll talk about week 3. We're in week 3 right now. In week 3, you're going to find 2 discussion forums. The first one is on discussing effective vocabulary instruction, and the second one is sharing a draft of what's going to be your final capstone assignment. It's a lesson plan that you will create using a template that you find on the assignment page in Moodle. And it's set up as a discussion. So you'll be able to share ideas with colleagues in the course and offer feedback to help refine your lesson plan. So please offer constructive feedback to others, and take those the feedback that you receive if you see a way to improve on what is added to that discussion. Then week 4, you're going to finalize with any feedback you got and upload your final reading lesson plan. So it's on one of the components, whether that's alphabetics or vocabulary or comprehension and fluency. And you'll have a lesson plan ready to go for, maybe sometime when you're observed by your administration, or something that you can use, coming up soon. The final step will be to reflect on your process, the process of planning a reading lesson plan, the feedback you got, and actually teaching that lesson plan if you have a chance to do that before the end of the course. The course will end at the end of week 4. So the good thing is that we do leave it open. You will have access to go back and, bookmark or look at anything after that for 2 weeks, and review anything that you may need to, download any resources and so on. But you can see the due date for the final reflection and so forth is Friday, March 6th, so the end of week 4. With that, we're pretty much up on the end of the time. Are there any final questions before I hand it off? All right. Well, thank you. I've really appreciated reading all your posts. Seems like you all are excellent reading instructors. So hopefully you've just, got some validation through the course and maybe picked up a few new things that you can add to your toolkit. So I'll hand it off now to Adria.
Thanks so much, Kristi, and thanks to everyone. I feel like we're at an ending point, but we're not really. Of course, we're just halfway through the third week, and we still have another week and a half, 10 days or so to go. But since this is our last time to connect face to face, voice to voice, I'd just like to share a little bit of information about our process for registering for continuing education units or CEUs. Now, I do want to be clear that without taking any additional steps, all participants will receive, when you finish the course, all participants would receive just a digital certificate from CalPro by email within a couple weeks of the course end date. But if you would like to, you can also apply through a partnership that we have with CSU Sacramento's College of Continuing Education for CEUs. And so the process for that is that once we have a list of those who completed the course, I'll send out an email to you. So you don't really need to be very active about it. Just watch for an email. But if you do want to take advantage of that opportunity, you would just reply and let us know, and I'll be able to send you a registration form that you'll return directly to Sac State. So that's how that process works. And just watch for an email after the end of the course. Thanks again so much to all of you for being here, individually, in groups, on the go, on the move, however you are. We're delighted to have you, and thanks for your participation. Thanks as well to Kristi for carrying us through this session so deftly, and we appreciate you a lot. Thanks,
I just have
everyone.
one quick question. One quick
Yes,
question.
Adela,
So,
yes.
how much would it be if we wanted to get that for that fee?
I want to say the fee is something like $75, perhaps, something along like that. But yeah, I can get that specific information for you, Adela, but it's somewhere in that range anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, absolutely. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.